Can you see me okay, Melissa?
I sure can.
Perfect. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining today. I think you'll really enjoy this session. It's really from introductory level kind of up, and it's really fast to be able to go through many demos in Power Query. I think you'll really enjoy the topic. It's one of my favorite new BI tools, and it's all part of Excel. So it's all about getting started with Power Query in this session. My name is Devin Knight. I run the training department with Pragmatic Works. You're welcome to email me here. You see my email address and Twitter as well if you use Twitter. So our focus for today is really Power Query, but I'm also going to take a step back and talk about Self-Service BI in general, and how does Power Query fit into Self-Service BI? What's the point of Self-Service BI with Power Query, and how does it fit into the whole life cycle of Self-Service BI? So really within the life cycle of Self-Service BI, you have data extraction, which by the way, that's what Power Query focuses on. You have data modeling, which we'll talk about the tools for that. And then obviously you have data presentation. So this is all kind of within the life cycle at a high level what Self-Service BI means. And if you want to connect a tool to each of these parts of your life cycle, of course, like we just said, there's data extraction, which could be either Power Pivot or Power Query. Power Pivot is going to give the ability to bring data into a model, so it's extracting data out of some kind of source and putting it into a model for you. And you have Power Query, which does the same thing. You can extract out of a source, and you can eventually get into Power Query. So the inevitable question is, why would I do Power Query over Power Pivot? Well, Power Query really is a self-service ETL tool. It's not just an extraction tool that can take data out of one place and put it into another. It also has that transformation layer. It uses a query language called M that actually allows you to modify data as it comes in. So it has that extraction layer, and then eventually you can load it into something like a Power Pivot model. But just note that you do have data extraction both with Power Pivot and Power Query. The reason you would choose Power Query is you can pull from more unusual data sources like Hadoop, HD Insight, other types of big data sources, as well as some other ones that I have listed here as well. So you have a big variety of different data sources that you can pull in with Power Query, as well as Power Pivot, but again, Power Query gives you that transformation layer. Now once you get the data into Excel or pull the data into your layer into Excel, the next step is to then model it somehow. So again, this is the whole evolution of Self-Service BI now, all through Power BI with Microsoft. The data modeling section, of course, is going to be done with Power Pivot. Power Pivot allows you to do things like create relationships through tables that didn't previously exist, create hierarchies, so logical hierarchies where my users can then navigate through country, state, city very easily. Create centralized logic, so create calculations where they're all centralized in one spot. And also they have the ability to do things like key performance indicators. So that's all within inside of Power Pivot. Then finally you want to present the data some way. And again, within inside the Microsoft stack, you have several ways of presenting data as far as self-service. It can be regular Excel pivot tables. And then I can do tables, charts. I can do apps for Office as well. That's a new functionality in Excel 2013. You can also do Power View. Power View is fairly new. It came out with SQL Server 2012, but also exists in Excel 2013. And then finally, you could also do Power Map. Power Map is a 3D mapping tool built into Excel 2013 that allows you to do some really impressive mapping. And you guys will actually see a demonstration of that on Friday. Pragmatic Works will have a webinar on Power Map as well. So this is the high level. Here's what Self-Service BI means, and here's within the Microsoft stack how you can do Self-Service BI. Okay, so kind of highlighting the tools here. Now, I go out of my way to say this in the very beginning here. Self-Service BI is not going to replace Enterprise BI. Enterprise BI meaning I use a SQL Server database, and I use SSIS to load the database, and I use analysis services, whether it's tabular or multidimensional, as a layer on top of it, and then I use other reporting tools, maybe reporting services or maybe performance point. Those things are not going away. Self-Service BI is going to be an answer for your small departmentalized problems. So I have, maybe someone walks up to you and they say, I have this CSV file, I need to get loaded into a table. Well, then you probably want to introduce them to Self-Service BI. Rather than them having to wait a day for you to kind of turn around an SSIS package and create a table for it and put it through QA and production, they could solve the problem on their own. And if it's a very small problem like this, through Self-Service BI. Self-Service BI will also help in making additions to existing modeling that you've done. So if you're in IT and you've created a data warehouse, then Self-Service BI can help in making additional functionality into what already exists in your data warehouse. So I've built out a data warehouse. I hand this off to my end users. My end users continually find new data, whether it's on the web or whether it's through files that they get sent to them, and they want to be able to add that functionality into the existing enterprise solution. So that's where Self-Service BI actually works in conjunction with Enterprise BI very well, or Corporate BI, whatever you prefer to call it. So there is differentiation between the two, and they're going to work together. They're not necessarily, one's not going to replace the other, but they're going to kind of work in harmony. All right. Now, if you're more interested, I know this is a high level of all these tools, and we're focusing in on Power Query for this demonstration. If you're interested in some of these other tools, I actually run a training class, which you'll have a survey on at the end if you're interested in it. But in that training class, we cover all of these BI tools, and it gives you a good perspective on how each of them work. Okay? All right, so let's focus in on Power Query now. We talked high level. Let's now focus in on Power Query. Power Query, again, is a self-service ETL tool, extract, transform, and load. So it's going to extract data out of some kind of source. You can apply transformations to it, meaning apply business rules, and then load it into Excel, whether it's through Power Pivot or just an Excel worksheet. Now you can do this now. In previous versions of Excel, you could do this. You could pull in data through things like the Data tab that's been there for years. And you could also do this same kind of idea through Power Pivot, where you can pull data into a Power Pivot model as early as Excel 2010. So this functionality has been there. What makes Power Query special is that transformation layer. I can apply transformations before bringing data in. Okay. Now, Power Query is actually a free add-in that you can go and download. So you can go do a quick Bing search for Power Query download, and you'll find it very quickly. And what Power Query is it's just a free add-in for Excel, and it'll work as early as Excel 2010 or 2013. So even if you're on Excel 2010, this add-in will work for you as well, which is pretty rare. It's rare that they come out with something new at Microsoft that actually works backwards compatibility. So this one will work in 2010. All right, so I want to get straight into demos. I have more slides, but I want to get straight into demos. And what we're going to do in this demonstration is I have several different kind of neat ways that you can use Power Query, and there's so many things that you can do with it. I'd rather spend more time on the demonstration side than show you any more slides. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do some data wrangling. We're going to go find some data, manipulate it, bring it in, and then apply some kind of reporting layer on it. Doesn't matter what the reporting layer is, but I want to show you once we get the data in, we can present it in some way all through Excel. All right, so let's do this. I'm going to launch open Excel. Obviously, if we're using Power Query, like I said, Power Query is a free add-in for Excel using in either Excel 2010 or 2013. Okay. Now, once you download and install Power Query, you will need to enable it inside of Excel. You can see mine has already been enabled because you can see that the Power Query tab exists up here on the very top. Okay. And I'm going to open up my Zoom tool here for you guys so you can see a little better. Apologize, I should have already had that open. There we go. So you'll see I have the Power Query tab already available here. If you don't have it after you install and download it, it's because you need to go enable it inside of Excel. To enable this inside of Excel, you go over to your File menu, and you go underneath Options. And underneath the Add-in section, so there's an Add-in page here, you'll select Add-ins. And down on the bottom, you'll see that there's a Manage section where you can manage your add-ins. And you want to manage the COM add-ins here. So you're going to flip this to COM add-ins and hit Go. From here, you'll see a list of all the add-ins that you've installed, and you can uncheck or check which ones you want to include. So like I mentioned, after you install and download Power Query, you'll need to make sure you come into this section and go ahead and check it off so that it's available to you for use. Okay? All right, once you have that, you just hit OK, and then you will see the Power Query tab here if you did not already previously. All right, so let's go look at this Power Query tab. What's new in here? A couple things high level we'll focus in on first. This section is devoted to pulling data in. So I can pull data in fact this one as well. So I can pull data into Power Query somehow, whether it's through an online search, which we'll talk about first, whether it's data that just exists on the web. I can pull data from multiple files, from databases, from other sources. This one's worth noting here a little bit. So from other sources, you can do things like SharePoint lists, you can do OData feeds, Azure Data Market, big data sources like Hadoop and HD Insight. You can pull in from Active Directory, from even social media outlets like Facebook, and you can even write queries against Twitter as well. But you can pull all that data into Power Query and then start manipulating it. And then the last option there, of course, is you see that you can write a blank query, which I will show you an example of how you would do a little bit later. This is using the query language called M. All right, a couple other things I'll note here. We'll come back to some of them a bit later. One thing I will focus in on for you here for the moment is you'll notice that in this section where it says Machine Settings, there's an option here where it says Update. This is a nice functionality of the Power Query add-in which will actually go and reach out and make a quick call and see if you need to update your version of Power Query or not. So it's actually an in-application update. So if there's an update out there that you need to pick up, then it'll automatically light this up. You click the button, and you can update Power Query all within inside of Excel. You'll also see an options button here. I'm going to focus you in on this options button for a moment, because what this options button that you really care about here is this option here called Advanced Querying Editing. This is what allows you to kind of write your own blank queries or modify existing queries that have been created for you. So a lot of what we're going to do here, it's all self-service. It's all done through a lot of drags and drops and clicks and right clicks. But under the covers, it's writing an M query for you. And if you want to see what it's doing, you would want to enable this Advanced Query Editing. Okay? So mine's already enabled. This is not enabled by default, though. So you would want to come and click on that and then hit OK. All right, so let's do our first demonstration here. We've kind of gone over high level of what this tab does. We can pull in data. We can eventually manipulate data. And we talked a little bit about the settings here. But I want to start by actually pulling some new data in. And you'll find that probably one of the easiest ways to get started is with an online search. An online search will actually search out, basically like a web browser search. It'll search out, I'm going to go ahead and click on it. It'll search out to data sources like the world's most popular online encyclopedia. Go figure, it's probably Wikipedia, right? So it actually uses Wikipedia right now and factual data from Wikipedia. Yes, there is factual data on Wikipedia. But it pulls back factual data from Wikipedia that you can then pull into Power Query. So for example, if I wanted to do an online search here, let's say for example I wanted to search out something like largest cities in Americas. Do a quick search here, you'll see that I get all these Wikipedia listings that are returned back through the online search option. And as I hover on top of each of these, it actually gives me a preview of what they look like before I click on them. So I can see list of largest shopping centers, I can see list of metropolitan areas, and then I can see largest cities in Americas, that's North and South America, listed here as my first option. So let's go with that. Let's select this first option. I'll select largest cities in America and pull in that data set. Okay. Now, right now this uses Wikipedia, but this online search will expand to other data sources going forward. Just want to point out right now it is using Wikipedia. All right, so I got my data is now pulled into Power Query. It's now pulled into Excel. All we've done right now is a basic extraction. We pull data off of Wikipedia. We put it inside of Excel. If I actually want to apply transformations to the data, then I would come over to the Query Settings area here on the far right, which you'll see as long as you're inside the table. So this table that was created, as long as I'm inside the table, I'll see this Query Settings. If I go outside the table, it goes away. If I'm inside the table, it comes back, of course. Now, inside the Query Settings area, there's a couple things that are worth noting. First of all, there's a Filter and Shape section, which is where you'll do any kind of transformations to the data. Any kind of a data manipulation is done through that Filter and Shape section. You'll see there's a data refresh option here, so I can hit refresh and it'll go and it'll extract the latest version of that data. Okay. As of right now, that's the only way to do data refreshes through Power Query. There are the only native way, I should say. There are some other ways I've seen. Matt Mason, for example, had a blog on doing it through SSIS. There's also, you could write a macro, of course, to do it. But as far as native refreshing, the refresh button here is the only way to do it thus far. I imagine you'll see this will actually be made automated over time. And if Power Pivot is any indication on how it will be done, it would probably be done through SharePoint. But that's not defined yet. I'm just assuming how they would automate that data refresh eventually would likely be through SharePoint. Now, one other thing I'll note here on the far right bottom is you'll also see that there's an option here called Load to Data Model. Now, if you're using Excel 2010, you will not see this option, but you can do essentially the same thing. But what this Load to Data Model button does here in Excel 2013 is it sends my data into Power Pivot. So it takes the data that we've gotten so far from Power Query and throws it into Power Pivot. This kind of follows the example of what I talked about where I can start off with one data source and find data on the web or find data in some other kind of data source and merge them together using Power Pivot. Okay? So it gives you the ability to do that here very easily. Just by hitting this button, it'll launch open Power Pivot and import the data into it. All right, so for me, though, I want to start by actually doing some transformations to the data. So I'll start by hitting this Filter and Shape button. Like I mentioned, this is where you do data transformations. And it's going to launch open my query editor here. So this is my query editor for Power Pivot. I'm sorry, for Power Query, excuse me. Too many power words. Now, what I want to show you in here first is there are a couple things. You'll notice in the top that you can manipulate the query name. So right now this is called list largest cities in Americas, but you can actually change the name of the query. I can come in here and just call this largest cities if I want. You have some flexibility to rename this. It is definitely a best practice once you start using this tool to go through and rename queries to be more appropriate, because you're going to start merging these together, and if they're not named appropriately, you'll find that it's confusing whenever you're trying to merge multiple data sets. Now you'll see the actual data set here in the bottom. I can see each of the columns. I see several columns in here for the city, country, population, year, and there's some extra key columns in here I don't really care about. If I see columns that I don't care about, I could always select them just like this and remove them by simply right-clicking and selecting Remove Columns. Okay. Now I see that there's geographical data in here. I see city and country listed in here. And if I ever want to kind of map geographical data, it's best to be explicit as possible with where you're referring to. So for example, what I mean by that is I could have multiple cities with the same name. I could have a Springfield, Illinois, Springfield, Florida. There's all kinds of Springfields in every one of the states. Now, you generally want to be as explicit as possible when it comes to geographical data. And because of that, what I'd like to do is actually do a little concatenation of city and state together. And this will kind of help us demonstrate, this is actually country. So I'm going to concatenate city and country together. And this will kind of demonstrate some of the transforms that you have available to you inside of Power Query. Obviously, this still would give the same issue. I could have, unless I had state in here, I could really be much more explicit. But you will kind of get the idea by what we'll do here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually duplicate country. I'm going to make a duplicate column here by right-clicking on country and selecting duplicate column. So I now have an exact copy of that column here called copy of country. And what I'd like to do is merge both city and country, that copy of country, together. And that way I'll have a very explicit version of what my city name is. Now this is actually pretty simple to do. You simply select city and multi-select copy of country, and then right-click on any one of them and tell it that you want to merge these columns. So we're applying another transformation here. We'll select Merge Columns, and what it's going to ask us then is how do we want to merge the columns? If we merge these two columns together, how do we want to separate them? The default setting is the separator is a space, but you could also select a colon, a comma, an equal sign, whatever kind of separator value you want to have in between the two columns. I'm going to do a custom one because what I want here is I want to have a comma and a space to be how I separate city and country. All right, so I'll do custom, and then I'll select a comma and a space, and then hit OK. And what this does is it very quickly gives me a new column here called Merged, where it merged those two columns together, and I have my city and my country merged together. So I can easily come down here and right-click on it and rename it to a more appropriate column name. I'll call this just city. Okay. Now a couple other things to note in here. You'll notice that I also have population. Population, unfortunately, right now is brought in as a string value, and you can tell that just by your probably knowledge of Excel you already have. By the fact that it's left aligned, that means that it is being brought through as a string. When really population is actually a integer value or a number value that I'd like to aggregate up. So I want to be able to aggregate this, but one thing I want to point out to you here is this is Wikipedia, so occasionally you have bad data in here. In fact, Venezuela is brought in with a population that has a space in it. So if I intend to convert this to a number value and eventually aggregate it, then I'm probably going to have some kind of a problem there. Now one solution is I can go back to the Excel table that I imported and actually overwrite it and take out the space. Or I can just convert it as it is by right-clicking on the population column and telling it that I want to change the type to a number. And when I do that, it'll convert all the columns except for that one, or all the rows except for that one. So that one where I had an issue, Venezuela, just shows as an error until I go to actually fix the Excel table that I had the import in. So keep that in mind. That is an issue here, but there are ways to work around it. It's in an Excel table. All right, so I've applied the transformations. I'm happy with the transformations I've applied. I'll go ahead and hit Done in the bottom right to tell it that I'm done. Before I do that, though, I'll point out in the top right section, you'll see that there's a Steps section. The really cool thing about this Step sections, it'll actually allow you to kind of step through each of the transformations that you've done. So I can go back to the original data set, the original source, and see what it looked like originally. And then I can kind of step through each of the transformations that we applied to see how we made modifications. The nice thing about this is if you made a mistake earlier on, somewhere upstream, I can go back and fix it, and then it will apply it all the way downstream through all the other transformations that you've done. So it's really nice that you have the ability to do that. You can also remove any step. If you don't like one of the transformations you did, you simply hit X, and it will remove them for you. Now we're looking at a sampling of the data. This is actually a small data set, so we're probably looking at all the rows here. But if you have a very large data set, this usually just shows a sampling of the data because this is the query window. When I actually hit Done in the bottom right, it's going to apply that query again, but to all rows. So it's actually applying that across all the rows that we have in our data set, even if we had hundreds of thousands. Okay, so we did a small transformation. We did some modifications to this data set. Let's actually visualize this some way. Okay, now I'm going to be showing Power View inside of Excel. This is not part of Power Query. This is part of Excel that I'm about to show you, but it's different from Power Query. But I want to show you some way of visualizing the data, show you really what we got here, and that it's actually usable fairly quickly. Now Power View is part of Excel 2013. It's not part of Excel 2010. Or you could also do SQL Server 2012 with SharePoint 2010. Okay, just to kind of get the requirements laid out there. So I am using Excel 2010 so I can demonstrate this for you. So I'm going to go over to my Insert menu inside of Excel and insert a Power View report. So inside this Power View report, what I'd like to do is create a quick little demonstration here of what I can do from as far as a reporting layer on this data. So it's launching Power View inside of Excel. I'm going to go ahead and remove the filter section. And what I'll do here is I'm going to uncheck year, and I want to visualize this as a bar chart. So I'll select the stacked bar chart. And actually, let's make this a map. This makes more sense to be a map, I believe. I got city and state information in here. So I'm going to take out here, and I'm going to put city inside my locations area. I'm just kind of moving things around. Again, our focus is not Power View here, so don't worry if I lose you too much in the Power View section. Our focus is more on the Power Query side. But what I'm able to do very quickly with Power View is demonstrate and visualize this data somehow so I can see where my largest populations are in the North and South America continents. So it's like Sao Paulo, Brazil has the largest population, followed by places like New York and Mexico City, and I have Lima, Peru, and some other countries in here as well. All right, so that's a very quick demonstration. Let's do another one, though. I'm going to show you this time how we can pull data, again, from inside the Power Query tab. This time, the rest of our examples are going to be pulling data from the web. So we showed Power Query pulling from an online search. Now let's show how we can pull data from the web. Now, if you're interested in some of the data sources that I'm using here, I'm using a lot of public data sources that you'll see here me use in the next few examples. And one of the most common public data sources is government data. Government posts a lot of data out publicly for people to look at. And one of the ones we're going to look at here is on data.gov. So if you go to exploredata.gov, I have it on my other screen here. Let me bring it over. It's exploredata.gov that we're looking at here. And on this website, as you scroll down, there's a ton of different data sources that you can look at. And the one data source that we're going to use for our example here is one called FDIC failed banks right here. You'll see this is a list of all the failed banks within the last 10 years, or really 12 years. So I'm going to select this data source. And what I'd like to do, and think about this if you're really an IT person, if you're a BI person, if you use SSIS, think about how you'd solve this problem in SSIS and see how much easier it is to do in Power Query. If I was using SSIS, I'd have to come download this CSV file, create an SSIS package, create a connection to the CSV file, then make sure I do all the formatting in the connection file to make sure it's going to bring in the columns appropriately, and then finally create a data flow to take this data and load it into some kind of a data source. That's a lot of steps. It's probably maybe, even if it's an easy data source, it may be an hour's worth of work. With Power Query, watch how easy this is to do. I'm not even going to download the file. I'm just going to take a link to the file by right-clicking on the button here and telling it that I want to copy the shortcut to the file. Then I'll go over to Power Query, back where we were, and in the Power Query window, I'm going to select that I want to pull data from the web. So I'm going to get external data from the web, which is going to launch open and ask me what URL do I want to pass into Power Query. Well, I just copied a shortcut to a URL, so I'll paste that in here, and you can see my shortcuts, the download file for my CSV file. It's not actually going to download anything, though. And then I'll hit OK. Now, it'll bring this data for all the FDIC failed banks into Power Query, and it brings it in as a CSV file. So you can see what it looks like here. This is just a comma-separated file here. And Power Query can handle this actually fairly easily. Think about what you'd have to do in SSIS for this. I'd have to identify a comma separator. I'd have to then tell it which columns I want to bring in, what the data types are. All that functionality is very easy to do, and it's all clicks inside of Power Query. So for example, if I wanted to identify each individual one of the columns here, I would right-click on my column header, tell it that I want to split these columns by a delimiter, my delimiter being a comma, okay, so it's a comma-separated file, and I want to do that comma separation or split these columns after each iteration of my delimiter. So after each comma, go ahead and split. So I'll hit OK, and it now creates all the necessary columns for me here now. Pretty cool. Just within a click, I'm able to do that. Now you'll also notice that the first row here, the first row of data is actually my column headers. So if I want to fix that problem, I right-click on the column header and tell it to use the first row as headers. Okay, just like that. So all I did was a simple right-click. Let me show you once more. So here, and this is a good opportunity to show you each of the steps. So I went through each of these steps. I brought in the data. I can show you the first row as the column header again. I right-clicked on my column header and told it to use the first row of data as my column header. So when I tell it to do that, you'll notice that city now becomes my column header. Very easy to do. What else do I want to do in here? I probably want to eliminate some columns I don't care about. Like I could care less about the whatever code this is. It looks like it's a zip code, but it's really not. I could care less about the update date or the column 8 that just has a bunch of nulls in it. So if I don't care about these columns, I can select them and then right-click and remove those columns and just end up with the data set I care about. I'd also like to probably do some things here with a date, because you'll notice as the date's coming in here that it's actually formatted as a string. So I have some data type issues here. This right now is coming through as a string, but really I prefer it to be a date. And if I'd like to convert something to a date, I can just right-click on it, tell it to change the type to a date or a date time with a certain time zone. And if I select just date, it'll convert that to a date for me. Perfect. That's exactly how I'd like to see it. Now if I want to get even more creative with this, and let's say for example I want to see just the year, because remember I have 10 years or really 12 years worth of failed banks here, and I want to aggregate it up to the year level, I could get real creative here by right-clicking on it again now that it's a date data type and applying a transform. And the transforms that I have available to me here allow me to convert this date to a day, to a month, to a year, or even to just the day of the week. I'm going to convert this to a year so that way I can see all of my failed banks by year. All right, now internally in your head, while you guys are watching me do this, think about which state is going to have the most failed banks. I'm kind of curious what you guys think. I wish I could ask you this question while we're sitting in front of each other, but think about this in your head right now. Which bank do you think, or which state do you think is going to have the most failed banks? So I'm happy with what we have so far. I'm going to take this data set in as it is. I'll go ahead and rename this one year. You can right-click on a column and, of course, rename it. So I'm going to rename this column year and hit done to import it. So I've imported this new data set from Power Query. It's now extracting that data, and I can see it inside of an Excel table. All right, so again, think about which state is going to have the most failed banks. All right, so I'm going to go to, I want to visualize this. Excuse me, I want to visualize this again somehow. So if I want to visualize this, I can do Power Query. I can put it into Power Pivot and create pivot tables off of it. I'm going to do a Power View report again. So I'm going to do Insert Power View, and I'll create a new Power View worksheet. Okay, and what I'd like to do here is I'm going to remove all these columns. I'm going to remove this existing table because I'm going to manipulate it some. What I'd like to see in here is I want to see the count of failed banks. Okay, so I'm going to take the count. Actually, that's the wrong one. I want to take the count of bank name to get the number of failed banks that I have. That's assuming that I don't have duplicate bank names in there. But for demonstration purposes, that works. And I also want to see city. State, excuse me, and then let's put this on some kind of a bar chart. So I'll put this on a stack bar chart. All right, so I can see all of my failed banks by state. All right, that looks good. Let's also see this by year. So I'm going to add into the legend field. I'm going to add in year so I can see by year which one of my banks or which one of my states had the most failures. And then if I wanted to, on the very top here, I could tell it that I want to sort this. Rather than sorting it by state, let's sort it by the count of banks, descending. And then very quickly we can see that Georgia is the highest as far as failed banks across the last 12 years. And I can look at each individual bar here to see for 2009 they had 25 failed banks, for 2010 they had 21 failed banks, and for 2011 they had 23. I could also visualize this in a map. Keep in mind I have data here, the geographical data. If I wanted to visualize this in a map, I could click the map button and visualize all of my failed banks by state, bring in city as well, and then as I go closer and closer into Georgia to see where all those failed banks were, I can click on the bubble for the state of Georgia, double click on it, and it'll expand and show me all of the cities that had failed banks within inside of Georgia. So this is Power View, and it's accepting the data from Power Query. Okay? So again, this is more on the Power View side, the data presentation side, the sexier side. I think Power Query is pretty sexy still, and you know what? I want to show you for one of our last couple examples here. We still have some time. But for my last two examples here, I have some really sexy examples. The first example is I'm going to bring in multiple data sources. All right, so I want to be able to determine out of all of the countries in the world, by year, how does things like income and total population and even things like BMI, body mass index, how do these three different types of metrics affect each other? So as, for example, maybe as income starts to increase, maybe body mass index also starts to increase. I want to be able to kind of map this out and see if my hypothesis here is true. As income increases, do we also get a higher BMI rate for each of our countries? So do we get fatter, basically, is what it is. Body mass index is a metric on weight here, essentially. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to another website to show this example. This time it's a website called gapminder.org. It's a website run by a professor, and it has a ton of different public data sources in here. The data source I'm going to pull from, I'm going to go to the data tab here. The data source that I'm going to start with, we're actually going to start by pulling in just BMI, and then we're going to pull in income, and then we're going to pull in total population and merge all these data sources together using Power Query. So I'll start by searching out my BMI data source, and I see that the body mass index for men is the first one that pops up. I'll go ahead and use that one. I could actually pull in men and women and combine them if I wanted, but I'll just make this a simple example. We'll do men. All right, so I want to take the file that exists here, and I can right-click on it and get the shortcut just like we did in the last example. Okay, so remember what we did last time was I didn't actually download any file. I just right-clicked on it and copied the shortcut, and then I brought that shortcut into Power Query. So let's do that. I've got my body mass index file that I want to use, or link that I want to use. I'll bring it back over into Excel, go to my Power Query tab, and then open another external data source from the web. So again, we're doing from web this time again. I'll select from web and then put in my URL. Okay, I'll hit OK to actually import that data into Power Query. It'll launch that into a query editor here again. And then I'll bring open my data table, which is going to have all of the data that actually exists inside this file. You'll notice here on the far right, this navigation pane has the actual Excel file and then all of the Excel sheets that are inside that file. Now let's take a look at the actual data here. You'll see inside the file that it looks like my first thing I need to do is I need to deal with column headers, right? So I need to right-click on the column header and tell it to use the first row as a column header. That's an easy enough fix. Okay, easy enough. My other problem here is that I can see that this data is not formatted very well for analysis. Think about creating a report on this where I have each of the years as an actual column. You would never put data in a data warehouse like this, right? You'd probably unpivot the data, make year a column, and make BMI a column and be able to analyze it that way rather than seeing a column for every year. This is a common occurrence with government data or accounting data even, where you'll see data come in that needs to be unpivoted prior to bringing it in. All right, so let's walk through how we would do this. If I wanted to unpivot this data, I'm going to unzoom for a moment. I would select all the columns that I want to unpivot. Unpivot meaning turning these columns into rows. I would select all the columns I want to unpivot, hold down Shift, select the last column, and then right-click on any one of them and select Unpivot Column right here on the bottom. Okay, so it's another transformation we're unpivoting. You could do this in SSIS as well with the unpivot transform. So the same kind of concept, but all much more self-service delivery inside of Excel. All right, so I selected unpivot. It converted all those columns into rows, and now I see a row for 1980, 1981, 1982 for each of my countries. Now, it probably makes sense to go ahead and rename these, so I'm going to rename attribute is actually going to be called year. Okay, and value is actually going to be called BMI. Okay. All right, so I'm just renaming a couple columns here. Now what I'd also like to do is do some conversion. You'll notice again that year is coming through as a string, and you can tell that because it's left aligned here. So if I want to convert year, I would right click on it and tell it to change the type, which is essentially change the data type to a number. Okay. Now the other thing I want you to pay attention to here as well is that the data that we're bringing in is from 1980 to 2008. As I scroll down, you'll see it goes all the way to 2008 until it stops. And this is what why I want you to keep this in mind is because when we pull in other data sources, you generally want to compare apples to apples. So if I pull in other data sources, then I probably want to filter it to only show from the years 1980 to 2008. I also should rename my data set. My query in the top left, I should rename this something more appropriate like BMI. That way whenever I go to merge these data sources together, it'll be very clear on which one's which. So always rename your query. All right, so we got this first data set down. I'll hit done. Now we need to pull in another data set. We got BMI. Our next one that we're going to pull in is going to be income. So I'm going to go back to that Gapminder website, and rather than searching for BMI again, this time I'm going to search for GDP per capita. Inside this one, I'll see that there is one here called income per person. Income per person is going to give me, if I do the same thing we've done previously, right-click on the download link and copy the shortcut. Income per person will give me income for each country by year, just like we had BMI. So I'll go back to Excel. I'll do Power Query window again. It's the same steps. I'm going a little bit faster this time because we've already done it once. I'm going to do pull from the web and paste in my URL and hit done. Now I'm going to do this one a little bit faster because I'm going to do some of the same transforms we've already done once. So this will be kind of a repeat. So in case you missed some of the things I did last time, pay close attention this time because it'll be the same things I've already done once prior. But once this gets imported, I'll need to do the unpivoting of the columns. I'll also need to rename column headers and also change the data type per year. So you'll see me go through some of these things pretty quickly. And then the last thing that I'll do, the last transformation I'm going to apply, is going to be filtering down the data, and this will be something new for you. All right, so again, I'm going to go underneath the Data tab of my Pub Excel workbook. I can see all the data here for this. Looks like my first row is my column headers again, so I'll say use my first row as column headers, just like we've done several times already. I need to unpivot these columns, so I see 1800 as a column, and I need to go all the way down to 2012. Oops, I didn't hold down Shift. Let me hold down Shift again. There we go. And if I want to unpivot this, I simply right-click and do unpivot like we did in the previous example. So I select the columns I want to unpivot. You right-click and do unpivot. A couple columns in here are kind of useless, so I'll just select these few columns and remove them. Okay. All right. Now we're looking a little closer to what we had in our other example. I need to do some renaming, so I need to rename this one as country. I'll rename this one as year. Okay. And I'll rename this last one as, what do we got here? This is income. All right, and I'll go ahead and also rename my data set as income, and then finally I will change my data type of year to a number. All things I've showed you how to do once prior. Oh, I made a mistake. I clicked the wrong button, so I'll go back to my steps here and hit X to remove that last transform, and then right-click and do change type to number again. I just hit the wrong kind of conversion. All right, I also said that I want to compare apples to apples. So I want to compare 1980 to 2008. And right now we're looking at the 1800s. So if I really want to do a true comparison, I would hit the down arrow here and tell it that I want to filter out all the rows that aren't between 1980 and 2008. So I would do a number filter, and I would say everything that's greater than or equal to 1980, just like a regular Excel filter, and less than or equal to 2008, I want to remove all the other rows out. So you can see here I'm looking at just 1980 to 2008 in my data now. All right, I'll hit done to import that data set. And then I'll do this last one really quick because you've seen it a couple times now. This last one that I'm going to pull in is total population. Okay, you got to spell it right. Okay. Inside my total population file, I'm going to get this total population with projections. And I'm going to copy out this link again. Same steps we've done a couple times at this point. I'll go back to the Power Query window and tell it I'm going to get data from the web. Paste this in. Hit OK to actually import this new data set with population in it. And then we'll apply the same transforms. The same exact transforms we did in the last example, I'm going to do here again. So that would be renaming my query, telling it the first row has the column headers in it, unpivoting my years, and also changing my data type of year, and then doing the filtering on year as well. So you'll see me do this one a little bit faster because I want to show you the big punchline here at the end. So my first row has the column headers. I want to unpivot all of my year columns. So you can see it has projected years in here as well. There's some guesses as far as population. I'm going to unpivot my years. I'm going to convert my data type for year to a number. I'm going to rename my columns to country, year, and population. Okay, you guys have seen this already. Nothing new here. The big punchline at the end, though, is I'm going to combine all these together, and you want to see how I do this. I'll rename my data set population. And then finally, the last step is I need to filter down my rows just like we did in the last example by doing a number filter that are greater than or equal to 1980 and less than or equal to 2008. Hit OK. All right, my 3 individual data sets are now complete. I've got all 3 of the individual data sets correct. Now I need to merge them together somehow, and I'm going to do that through the Merge button at the top here. You'll see underneath the Power Query tab or underneath the Query tab, underneath the Table Tools, there's an option here called Merge, where I can actually merge multiple data sets together. So for example, I started off with a BMI query. I want to merge BMI with income. And then I tell it which columns are my merge columns. So I want to merge based on my country and my year. Those two combination of columns make my join between these 2 data sets. It does do left outer joins here, so it won't eliminate any rows. It'll just bring back where they have, essentially it's doing a left outer join. So you're not going to be missing out of any rows by doing this join between the 2 data sets or this merge. All right, so I'm going to merge these 2 data sets together, tell it what my join columns are. You'll notice on the bottom here it tells me how many rows I actually found matches for. Don't worry if you don't have a match for every row, it's okay, but just note the fact that every row didn't have a match, and then hit OK. Now with these 2 data sets merged, you'll notice how it handles this. It actually creates a new column for me here on the far right that has my income table nested inside of it. So it actually does a concept of nested tables here. And if I want to bring back the income column from that, I would hit this little expand button right here, and then underneath this it would show me all the columns that I have available to me. And I just want to add the income column to my existing data set. So I'd select income and then hit OK. Okay? Let me go ahead and right-click and rename this to income. And then we are looking good for our last join of our data. And we're almost out of time here. So I've joined 2 data sets together. Now we need to join the 3rd data set together. I'll go ahead and let you know you can only join 2 at a time. There's no joining more than 2 at once. So now what I need to do is do another merge. This time I'm merging between merge 1, so you can tell here I didn't do proper naming conventions, but I want to merge 1 with population. Again, my join column is country, and year, and year. Okay, it'll tell you here on the bottom how many you had matches for again. So it looks like I had perfect matches this time. Looks good. And then I'll hit OK. So again, I'm merging these 2 data sets together based on country and year. And then again, it's going to ask me here to expand my nested table and select the columns that I want to include. So I want to add population to this. I'll hit OK. And I've now got 3 metrics in here that I can really do some good analysis on. All right, so let me show you how this works. I'm going to hit Done. I should have renamed that column. That's fine. Let me do it real quick. Let me go rename that column population. And then we'll show one final report with how I can compare all of these metrics together. So there's really one good type of chart inside of Power View for looking at multiple metrics, specifically for looking at 3 metrics at once. And that's a scatter chart. So I'm going to go insert this into Power View again. And what I'm going to do this time is use a scatter chart, which is basically a bubble chart that you can do some animation on. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to pull in, I'm going to actually start from scratch here. I'm going to remove this table for now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in the BMI, the income, and the population, and I'm going to put this on a scatter chart up top here. It's underneath other charts. I'll select scatter. Again, this right now what I'm showing you is a 2013 feature only. Power Query, however, where I actually brought the data in, could be used really through 2008 as well. Now what I'd like to do is I want to be a little humorous here, and I'm going to make the BMI the size of my bubble, and I'm going to make the population my x-axis. And I want to see each of the bubbles. I want to have a bubble for every country. So I'm going to bring in, I'll just check off country so I can see a bubble for every country. It looks like population, China and India are leading the way. As far as income, I got things like Bermuda up here. I got Qatar. I've got some other countries I've never heard of, and Luxembourg. I need to go work in those countries. And then we have United States here, kind of the middle of the pack, where income is pretty high, but it's still kind of, I guess it's more than middle of the pack. It's kind of high up there. And what I'd like to do, though, with a scatter chart is I want to animate this across time. So you'll see I have a year in here, and I want to see across time how has, I got all these years, so I want to see across time how does this actually affect, how does population and how does BMI and income all correlate with each other. So I'm going to add the year to the play axis, and when I do that, a little play button will appear here in the bottom. And when I hit that play button, it will allow me to see across time how my body mass index and income and population all correlate. So I can see the population of India and China have steadily been increasing. Luxembourg has been getting more and more wealthy, and then the United States has kind of just been bubbling across, getting a little bit fatter and a little bit wealthier, and population has also steadily increased a little bit. So I can do a comparison here. I can click on the United States and actually see the bubble, the path at which it got here, so I can see each level. It slightly got fatter and it got more populated and more wealthy over time. So I can see all that listed here. It's a really, really cool feature here. This is within Power View. All right, I have one more quick example I want to show you guys, and I'm probably going to run out of time, so I'm going to refer to my blog on this example as well in case I run out of time. My blog is at devonknightsql.com. You can just type in devonknightsql.com here, and you will pull it up. And you don't have to put the WordPress part on there. I have a ton of Power Query blogs. I recommend going to take a look at it, and I'd also recommend downloading the white paper that I wrote a couple weeks ago. This white paper actually walks you through how to use Power Query, when you would use it, who would use it, and then I walk you through a demonstration of how to use it against census data. So it's actually an example I haven't shown you today, but I actually walk you through an example of how you can pull in census data and make it usable inside of Power Query, and then finally put some kind of reporting layer on top of it. So I have a white paper I recommend you go download. You'll also see I have several other examples of Power Query demonstrations in here. The one I'm going to show you with the last few minutes here is how I can actually do some screen scraping on a website and then make it parameterized, where I can go across multiple pages and actually screen scrape across multiple pages. Okay? So this is a really cool example, and I'm going to pull it from the NFL data. I have NFL data listed right here where I have all of these different teams and their offensive stats. Okay? So these are offensive stats by team, and right now I can only look at one page at a time or one year at a time. So my URL here right now is focused in on the year 2010. If I want to see a different year, then I have to go to a different search and search for the different year here. So what I'd like to do, though, is I want to make it so that I can iterate over the last 10 years worth of NFL stats, right? So I want to go over the last 10 years of NFL stats and iterate over each of the years and then bring it into Power Query. And I'm definitely not going to have enough time to show you all this, but I want to show you how to get started with it at least. Okay? My blog actually has this completed example, so if you want to see how to parameterize Power Query and write Power Query M functions, this is the way to do it. And you'll see inside my blog an example of how to do it as well. All right, so last couple minutes here, let me just show you how to get started with this. I'm going to go to my Power Query tab. I'm going to get data from the web, paste in my URL. It's a really lengthy URL this time. Then what I'm going to do is actually manipulate this URL. Rather than only bringing back data for 1 year, I want to bring back data for multiple years. And I can do that by going underneath the table here, and I can see all the data for 2010. If I want to manipulate this and see data for multiple years, I can do that by going underneath the little query button here, this little button in the top right, which will show me all the M queries that have been running under the covers, behind the scenes that I couldn't see. Every time I did a transformation, it was doing an M query here for me. Okay, now what I'd like to do is I'm going to create a function here that I can pass into. I'm going to pass in a function called get year. Okay, and to identify a function here, you do a little equals and greater than sign. And then inside my URL, I'm going to track over to my URL and find where the year is hard-coded into it. Okay, so as I scroll over here, I should see a year right here. So right now, year is hard-coded into my URL. I'm going to change that instead to use a parameter. So I'll write out a quick concatenation of strings so I can concatenate into this URL my getYear function. Okay, so it's going to look something like this. It's going to be a number to text, okay, because I'm going to pass in a number and I need to convert it to a string. And then my function name was, again, getYear. And I'm going to concatenate that back into my URL. So basically what we're doing is I'm passing in a number, I'm converting it to a string, and then concatenating it into my URL. Now when I hit OK or hit done, it's going to change the results of what we see in the background to actually show an invoked function. So what this is it's now a parameter that when I hit this invoke button, I can pass in any year that I want. So I can pass in 2011, I can pass in 2012, whatever year I want, I pass in the value and it returns back results for that year. So now you can see New Orleans Saints is at the top. And if I wanted to change that, I go over to the steps section and hit the little settings button and change it to a different year. So New Orleans Saints is first now. If I want, I can change it to 2012. And now I should see, I believe, New England Patriots at the top. So very cool that you can have that flexibility. Now, if I wanted to make this dynamic, the way you would do this is I'd be done with this query. I'd hit done. Now, I don't want to have to pass in a value each time. I want it to be dynamic. I want to create a list of years and then have those years iterated over all on its own. So very quickly, how I can do this is underneath the Power Query tab. Underneath where it says from other sources, I'm going to create a blank query this time. And in this blank query, it's actually very simple. What I'm going to do is create a list of years. So I'm going to start with an equal sign and use that curly braces, open curly braces. Start with the year 2000 and tell it I want to go all the way to the year 2012 where I have data through. If I hit enter on that little query, it'll give me a list. So this gives me a list of all the years between 2000 and 2012 just by doing that little iterative function here. Okay. My next step is I need to convert this to a table. So I need to convert my list to a table by right-clicking on it and telling it to make this into a table. You can accept the default settings here, and then you'll see that this is now actually a table. Okay. Now the next step here, again, we're running out of time, and I want to take a few questions. The next step is I would actually create a custom column, and I would pass in the query from my original function from inside this one here. Okay, so where I did the original, remember this one here where I hard-coded 2012 in it, I would need to remove that invocation step where I invoked the query, the function with a hard-coded year. I would need to remove that and just have it set up so it's waiting for me to pass a year into it. Then when it's waiting for me to pass a year into it, I can come back to my original query, or my years list, and I can create a new column here. I know I'm going a little bit fast, but we're not out of time. I can create a new column where I actually pass in to the other query, which I aptly named query 2. I can pass in a function and pass in the column 1, into that function. So let me just show you what I'm doing here. Query 2 is the name of my function that we created originally, and then column 1 is my list of years that I'm trying to pass into it. By doing this, if I hit OK, it'll actually iterate over each of the years and then create a new custom column here that has a nested table in it. And then I can expand that table so that I can pull in data across multiple years. Now while this is going, this is going to take a little bit of time because the NFL website doesn't particularly like me iterating over it. But while this is going, let me ask you guys, I'll ask Melissa if she can kind of go through some questions that we have, and I'll take questions for a little bit of time. Now I will tell you this, guys, too, as well. I do use my blog to answer questions I don't have time to get to. So if you go to my blog, devonknightsql.com, you'll see that I actually write blogs every time I do a webinar where I do unanswered questions. So feel free to put a question in there that I may just not have time to cover right now. The other thing I'll mention real quickly is if you like this, if you like what I've shown you here today and you want to learn more about it, we do offer a training class on this. We offer a virtual training class. We also offer an on-site workshop where we come and we talk to you about this. I work for Paramedic Works. We do this kind of training. I run the training department. So just to mention in the last few minutes here is we have a self-service BI class this class right here, where we cover the entire Power BI stack, all the way from Power Pivot to Power Query to Power View and Power Map, all within inside of a single class. So you'll may want to check that out. It's a great class. I've been working hard to get that put together. I think you'll really like it. So Melissa, what kind of questions we got queued up?
Okay, let's get started. We do have quite a few, so some of these will have to go out to your blog if you don't mind. But let's go ahead and kick off this one. Can this tool be used to query across multiple SAS cubes from model with 1 cube per subject area?
Okay, so can we pull in multiple cubes together into Power Query? Yes, you can. So you can have multiple cubes as your data source. If you have these kind of disparate cubes around and you can pull them together into a single source, you certainly can, yes.
Okay, and let's see. Power View Power Query is not available in Excel 2013 Standard Edition. Is that a yes? Is that a question? Sorry,
yes, yeah, it sounds like it's a point, not a question, but yeah, they're correct. So a lot of these features I'm showing you are Office Professional, so you may have to have Office Professional for these. And they also now work with Office 365. In fact, we run Office 365 here, and I'm able to do these features. So, yeah, good point. You do have to have Office Professional to do some of the stuff I've shown here.
Okay. And Paula says, when you get rid of columns, do they come back when you refresh?
So if I get rid of a column inside Power Query, they're still there. It's just within a transformation step. I've made them hidden. So if I get rid of a column in my Power Query and I hit refresh, it still won't show it to me, but it's still there, and I can always go back and undo a step that I did in my transformation layer. So it's there, but it's kind of hidden from me because I've applied that transformation.
Okay. And are there limitations to number of columns on incoming queries?
No, not really. So the question, in fact, you'll see one of the examples I showed earlier. I had a year I had more than 1,000 columns. I had the year 1000 to 2012. I had more than 1,000 columns inside of a data set. That example I showed earlier with population, there's not really a limit. Now, what you'll see is whenever you're doing that filter and shape section, that the data sets that's shown in the filter and shape section, that little query editor, it's only going to show a small subset of the data, but it will still show them in there. So it'll show a sampling of it, and it will show all columns though.
Okay. And does Power View allow users to do cross-platform or cross-server queries?
Power View or Power Query? They said Power View?
They did.
So Power View, if you're using Excel 2013, as long as it's in a table, as long as you have data in a table, you can bring it into Power View. Ideally, you put it in Power Pivot first. It'll help performance a little bit. But all you have to have is data inside of a table. So if you can get data inside of a table in Excel, you can do Power View. So yes, you can apply across multiple data sources. The ideal thing to do is you would get those multiple data sources, merge them together inside Power Pivot, and then that way you can create relationships, and that way they can all relate whenever you're creating your reports.
Okay. And this question says, can you import flat files over FTP with Power Query?
You can import flat files. FTP is not really an option here, so one thing I'll point out to you here is inside Power Query, you can pull data inside from files. And I showed actually in my blog, there's an example of how to loop over multiple files using Power Query. So if you have 100 files and they all have the same column names, you can use Power Query to actually pull in data from all 100 files at the same time. I have that on my blog. Unfortunately, to correctly answer your question, no, there's no FTP option here, but you can pull in from files. So if you get 100 files and you put them all in one location, then yes, you can use them in Power Query, but not with FTP.
Okay. It looks like we're just out of time, and I just want to remind those that are in the audience, our sessions are recorded and will be made available by the end of the week. If you go to pragmaticworks.com, go to our Learning Center, go to free training, you can find future webinars and all of our past webinars right there for you. So thank you for joining us. Reminder, this week we have 5 days of webinars. Our topic is Self-Service BI, and we look forward to seeing you back tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you, Devin.